And what we're saying in conclusion is that, my Christian brothers and sisters, we need to have some charity amongst people that would disagree with us about how to interpret Genesis 1, 2, and 3.
If you can't listen to somebody else's discuss or rebuttal and discuss it with them, you kind of end up closed-minded. Look, I have certain things that I have come to believe based upon Scripture, and I'm open to listen to other things. And it doesn't mean that I'm going to accept it and change my mind, but I'm at least open to listen to it. And I also welcome it so that I can go back and tell the other person, as I noted at the beginning of the session, well, have you considered this, and given them my view, or at least what I've come to a conclusion with as well. If you don't do that, if we don't have charity with other fellow Christians, we close that door off, then we can't have these discussions amongst us. And my point is that there's going to be some things that Christians might disagree on. And I think that's really the point that you're making, Glenn. That doesn't have anything to do with the redemption story or the salvation or God's plan of salvation or how it came about. There are things that Christians can have different views on and still fellowship together. But there are some people that they cut off fellowship. I've had that happen to me in the past over different things, not just creation, that they just cut it off altogether, and all of a sudden they're not your friends. And I don't think that we should be that way amongst Christians.
There's two categories that we could talk about here. And both these categories are trying to explain the created world. So if we were to write, how do we interpret the created world across the top? And there's two major categories for explaining this. One is theology. Theology, and our interpretation of theology, tries to explain the world, how the world was made, what's wrong with the world, things like that. Another way of explaining the created world is science. Science looks at the world, does scientific method, does reasoning and interpretation, and tries to explain the created world. So both science and theology are trying to explain how the world works and how the world was created and what's going to happen to the world, etc. And both of them have human beings that interpret both of those things. And in a lot of areas, they agree. If you look at the areas where science and the Bible overlap and agree with each other, it's most things. Most things. I mean, look at scientists like in the past, like Kepler and Newton and these guys. These were giants in the scientific world that were faithful people. I mean, Newton wrote interpretations and Bible commentaries as well as his science. So there's much overlap between the Bible and science. Most things, there's no disagreements. Occasionally, there's some disagreements in area of friction. And in both of them, we have to decide as individuals, is my theology right or is my science right? And I can tell you, standing here again, I don't claim scientific expertise, but I can tell you from the science that I've observed and the theology I've observed that the times where we've had to change our theology based on the science are very few. And there have been some, and we explained some in that other session that we talked about earlier, Steve. We had a session on the Bible and science. There have been times in the past where we change our theology based on the science. Nobody now is walking around, at least I haven't met anybody, claiming that the sun is rotating around the earth based off of Ecclesiastes chapter 1. We've changed our view of the Bible interpretation. And there's also been times where the science has changed. If we look at how many times theology has changed compared to how many times science has changed, I'll stick with my 4,000, 6,000-year-old theology, thank you very much, and do so happily in the face of the blowing winds of science. Because I have still at my house on my shelf my astronomy book from when I took astronomy as an undergrad back in college. That book in one generation is only good for a doorstop, because the science has changed over that quickly. And so I'll stick with the theology 7 days a week rather than when there's a conflict, rather than the science.
So we're going to put our approach of charity with fellow Christians in practice as we get into Genesis 1:1, because Glenn, you and I have maybe a little bit of a different view on some of the things in Genesis chapter 1.
We might.
And so we ask people to tune in and find out about that. But we're still friends. We've been talking about and discussing this for a couple of weeks now, and we're going to continue to be friends.
Yes.
We're fellow Christians, and we're both still going to heaven.
Yes.
So we ask you to tune in next time and be with us as what, Glenn?
As we reason through the Bible.
Thank you so much for watching and listening. May God bless you.